In the glittering world of high society, appearances mean everything. Designer gowns, prestigious surnames, and the right connections determine who belongs and who doesn't. But what happens when someone who serves the wealthy is suddenly invited to sit among them? This is the extraordinary true story of Marcus Chen, a tech billionaire, and Diane Morrison, a single mother working as a waitress at an upscale restaurant, and the night that challenged everything elite society believed about worth, class, and human dignity. Marcus had built his fortune through innovation and hard work, rising from humble immigrant roots to become one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Despite his wealth, he never forgot where he came from. For 3 years, Diane had served him during his weekly visits to Le Bernardin, an exclusive restaurant where Marcus conducted informal business meetings. She was professional, attentive, and possessed a quiet dignity that impressed him deeply. Unlike other servers who fawned over his wealth, Diane treated him with respect, but never servility, professionalism, but never pretense. When Marcus received an invitation to the Metropolitan Charity Gala, one of the most prestigious events of the social season, he faced an unexpected problem. The invitation required a +1, and Marcus had recently ended a relationship with a socialite who had been more interested in his portfolio than his personality. He was tired of superficial connections, of people who valued status over substance. As the RSVP deadline approached, Marcus made an unconventional decision that would scandalize high society and change 2 lives forever. He approached Diane after her shift one evening with an unusual proposition. He would pay her $5,000 to accompany him to the gala as his guest, not as hired help, not as a publicity stunt, but as his equal, his companion for the evening. Diane's initial reaction was disbelief, then suspicion, but Marcus explained his reasoning with complete sincerity. He wanted to attend with someone genuine, someone who understood what it meant to work hard, someone who possessed authentic grace rather than performed elegance. After careful consideration and with some trepidation, Diane agreed. Neither of them could have predicted what would unfold that night. The stares, the whispers, the barely concealed contempt from some guests, and ultimately, a moment that would expose the hypocrisy of high society and reveal what true class really means. What Diane did that evening didn't just shock the assembled elite, it held up a mirror to their prejudices and challenged their assumptions about worth, dignity, and who deserves a seat at society's most exclusive tables. Before we dive into this powerful story, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And please, stay with us until the very end, because what happens at this gala will challenge everything you think you know about class, prejudice, and human dignity.
The evening shift at Le Bernardin was winding down when Marcus Chen approached Diane Morrison with a request that would sound absurd to anyone who overheard. Diane was counting her tips in the staff area, mentally calculating how much would go toward her daughter's school supplies and how much toward the overdue electricity bill. Single motherhood meant constant mathematics, endless juggling of insufficient resources. "Diane, do you have a moment?" Marcus stood in the doorway, having waited until her shift ended, respecting the boundary between her professional time and personal time. "Of course, Mr. Chen. Is there a problem with tonight's service?" Diane's mind immediately went to potential mistakes, the occupational anxiety of someone who couldn't afford to lose her job. "Not at all. Your service is always impeccable. I actually wanted to discuss something personal, if you're willing to hear me out." Marcus gestured toward a quiet corner of the restaurant, away from other staff members. Diane followed, curious and slightly concerned. In 3 years of serving Marcus, their interactions had been cordial but professional. This departure from routine felt significant. Marcus took a breath, seeming almost nervous, an unusual state for a man who regularly negotiated billion-dollar deals. "I have a situation, and I'm going to make you an offer that might sound strange. Please hear me out completely before responding." He explained about the Metropolitan Charity Gala, about the expectation of bringing a date, about his exhaustion with the superficiality of his social circle. I'd like you to accompany me to this event, not as an employee, but as my guest. I will pay you $5,000 for your time that evening, cover all expenses for appropriate attire, transportation, everything you need. I'm not asking you to pretend to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, someone genuine, intelligent, and dignified. Diane stared at him, processing this surreal proposition. $5,000 represented months of tips, could cover her daughter's dental work and the car repairs she'd been postponing. But something felt potentially exploitative about the offer. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but I have to ask, why me? And more importantly, what exactly would you expect from me?" Her directness was one of the qualities Marcus valued. "I expect nothing beyond your company for one evening. This isn't," he paused, choosing words carefully, "this isn't anything inappropriate. I'll provide separate transportation if you prefer, and you can leave at any time if you're uncomfortable. As for why you, because you're real. You treat me like a human being, not a bank account. You work with dignity and grace. And frankly, I think these society events could use more authentic humanity and less performed status." Diane considered his words carefully. "Mr. Chen, you understand that if I walk into that gala on your arm, people will make assumptions, not kind ones. I'm a black, single mother who serves food for a living. Your world doesn't typically welcome people like me except through the service entrance." "I know," Marcus said simply, "and that's exactly why I'm asking you, because their prejudices say more about them than about you. But I won't pretend this will be comfortable or easy. You might face rudeness, condescension, or even outright hostility. I can't protect you from all of that, though I'll do my best. So I'm asking you to consider carefully whether $5,000 is worth that potential discomfort." Diane thought about her daughter, about the opportunities that money could provide, about the principle of not letting other people's prejudices dictate her choices. She thought about her own dignity and whether attending this gala would compromise or affirm it. "I'll do it," she said finally, "but not because of the money alone. I'll do it because I refuse to accept that there are spaces where I don't belong simply because of who I am or what I do for a living. If they have a problem with my presence, that's their problem, not mine." Marcus smiled, genuine respect in his eyes. "That's exactly the attitude I was hoping for." If this story is resonating with you and you'd like to see more content about dignity, courage, and challenging societal prejudices, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us continue sharing these important stories.
The week leading up to the gala revealed just how much preparation was required to navigate high society's elaborate rituals. Marcus insisted on covering all expenses, sending Diane to an exclusive boutique that typically served only the wealthiest clientele. The experience was Diane's first real preview of what awaited her at the gala itself. When Diane entered the boutique, providing the appointment details Marcus had arranged, the sales associate's expressions shifted through a visible sequence: confusion, doubt, and barely masked disdain. A young woman with a severe black dress and an air of practiced superiority approached. "Can I help you?" The question carried an unspoken addition. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" "I have an appointment under Marcus Chen's account," Diane said clearly, maintaining her dignity despite the obvious judgment. The associate's demeanor changed instantly at the mention of Marcus's name, one of their highest spending clients. Suddenly, Diane was valuable, not for herself, but for her connection to wealth. The irony wasn't lost on her. For the next 2 hours, Diane was fitted with an evening gown, a stunning midnight blue dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. The seamstress, an older woman with kind eyes, whispered to her while pinning the hem. "You wear this dress beautifully, dear.
Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. That small kindness sustained Diane through the rest of the week's preparations. Marcus had also arranged for a stylist to consult with her about hair and makeup, though Diane insisted on keeping her natural hair, a decision that felt politically charged in a world that often demanded Black women conform to Eurocentric beauty standards. "My hair is part of who I am," Diane told the stylist firmly. "If that makes people uncomfortable, that's information about them, not about me." Meanwhile, Diane's daughter, 15-year-old Jasmine, had mixed feelings about her mother's upcoming evening. "Mom, are you sure about this? Those people, they're not going to be nice to you." She sat with her daughter on their worn couch in their modest apartment. "Baby, I've faced unkind people my whole life. I've been underestimated, dismissed, and judged based on my skin color and my job, but I've never let that determine my worth. This gala might be uncomfortable, but I refuse to accept that there are spaces where I don't belong." "But why put yourself through it?" "Because visibility matters. Because every time someone like me shows up in a space that doesn't expect us, we challenge their assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, we make it easier for the next person." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Also, the money Mr. Chen is paying me means you can get those braces you need, and I can finally get the car fixed. Sometimes courage has very practical benefits." Jasmine hugged her mother tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mom, even if I'm also worried." "That's fair," Diane laughed softly. "I'm proud and worried too." The night before the gala, Diane laid out her dress, shoes, and small clutch purse. Everything felt like a costume, props for a role she wasn't sure she was qualified to play. But then she reconsidered that thought. She wasn't playing a role. She was simply herself, in a different setting. The dress didn't change who she was. She thought about the wealthy patrons she had served over 3 years at Le Bernardin. She had watched them closely, not to imitate them, but to understand them. She had noticed that true confidence didn't come from designer labels or prestigious schools. It came from internal certainty about one's worth. She had seen wealthy people who were deeply insecure, and working-class people who moved through the world with unshakable dignity. Tomorrow night, she would walk into that gala as herself. A single mother, a waitress, a Black woman who had every right to occupy that space. She wouldn't pretend to be wealthy or connected or anything other than exactly who she was. And if that made people uncomfortable, perhaps they needed to examine why someone's presence threatened them so deeply. As Diane turned off her bedroom light, she felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it with the same dignity she brought to every aspect of her life.
The night of the Metropolitan Charity Gala arrived with all the weight of expectation and anxiety Diane had been carrying for a week. Marcus sent a car service, a sleek black vehicle that looked out of place parked outside Diane's modest apartment building. Her neighbors watched through windows as she emerged in her midnight blue gown, transformed but still recognizably herself. Jasmine stood at the door, capturing photos with her phone. "You look like a queen, Mom." "I feel like I'm gonna throw up," Diane admitted, laughing nervously. "Then throw up like a queen," Jasmine grinned. "Seriously, Mom, you've got this. Remember who you are." The drive to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel took 30 minutes through city streets. Diane watched the neighborhoods change outside the window, from her working-class area to increasingly affluent districts, until finally arriving at the hotel where the gala was held, a building so opulent it looked like something from a fairy tale. Marcus was waiting at the entrance, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he saw Diane emerge from the car, his face lit with genuine appreciation. "You look absolutely elegant." "I feel completely out of my element," Diane confessed quietly. "Then we're already more honest than half the people in there. Remember, you belong here as much as anyone. More than most, actually, because you earned everything you have through honest work and genuine character. They walked toward the entrance where photographers and society reporters were stationed, capturing arrivals for the social pages. Diane felt exposed under the camera flashes, hyper-aware of her difference from the typical women photographed at such events. "Marcus Chen, who is your companion this evening?" "This is Diane Morrison," Marcus said clearly, his tone suggesting no explanation was necessary or would be provided. The reporter's expression flickered with confusion. Clearly, Diane's name meant nothing in social registers, but the camera flashes continued. Diane kept her head high, channeling every lesson in dignity her mother had taught her. Inside the grand ballroom, the scale of wealth on display was staggering. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than Diane's apartment building hung overhead. Women wore jewels that could fund college educations. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. And the stares began immediately. Diane felt them like physical weight, eyes assessing her dress, her hair, her presence, trying to categorize her, to understand what she was doing there. Some glances were merely curious. Others carried unmistakable hostility. She heard whispers that weren't quite whispered enough. "Who is that with Marcus Chen? I've never seen her before. New money? Look at her hair. How interesting. Do you think she's a model, an actress?" Marcus remained close, his presence both protective and affirming. He introduced Diane to several business associates, all of whom were professionally polite while clearly confused by her presence. Their confusion became more pronounced when they learned she wasn't an entrepreneur, investor, or creative professional, the typical acceptable professions for those in attendance. When one persistent society matron directly asked Diane what she did, Diane met her eyes steadily and said, "I'm a waitress at Les Bernardins." The woman's expression cycled through shock, confusion, and poorly concealed condescension. "How interesting! And how exactly do you know Marcus?" "He's been a regular customer for 3 years. He appreciates good service," Diane said with a slight smile that suggested she was fully aware of the woman's judgment and entirely unbothered by it. The matron excused herself quickly, and Diane watched her beeline toward a cluster of other women, clearly to share this scandalous information. Within minutes, Diane could feel the shift in the room's energy. Word was spreading. Marcus Chen, the billionaire tech genius, had brought his waitress to the Metropolitan Charity Gala. Marcus noticed Diane's tension. "Holding up okay? Honestly, it's about what I expected. They're deciding whether I'm a curiosity, a scandal, or both," Diane said quietly. "For what it's worth, you're handling it with more grace than most people in this room have ever demonstrated in their lives," Marcus said sincerely. The real test, however, was just beginning.
The formal dinner portion of the gala revealed just how deeply prejudice ran in supposedly refined society. Diane and Marcus were seated at a table with 6 other guests, 2 couples representing old manufacturing wealth, and a pair of sisters whose family owned a media empire. The introductions were frosty, the women's air kisses toward each other pointedly not extended to Diane. As the first course, an artfully arranged foie gras was served by waitstaff in crisp uniforms, Diane caught the eye of a young black server. The woman's expression showed surprise and something like encouragement, seeing Diane seated as a guest rather than working the event. Diane offered a small, respectful nod. "So, Diane," began Patricia Rothschild, one of the society matrons at the table, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Marcus mentioned you work in food service. How quaint. Is that how you're putting yourself through school?" The implication was clear. Surely Diane must be working toward something better, something that would make her presence here more acceptable. "No, I'm not in school. I'm a career waitress. I'm also a single mother raising a teenage daughter." Diane responded evenly, refusing to show shame about her life. "Oh." Patricia's smile tightened. "How noble! It must be quite different from your usual Friday nights." Before Diane could respond, Patricia's husband Robert chimed in, addressing Marcus while barely acknowledging Diane's presence. "Chen, you've always been unconventional, but this is quite the statement.
Are we calling this a diversity initiative?" He laughed at his own joke. Marcus's expression cooled noticeably. "I invited Diane because she's genuine, intelligent, and possesses more authentic grace than most people I encounter in these circles. If that's uncomfortable for you, Robert, perhaps you should examine why someone's profession threatens you so deeply." An awkward silence fell over the table. The media heiress sisters exchanged glances, seemingly recalibrating their approach. One of them, Stephanie, turned to Diane with a new strategy, performative interest masking condescension. "It must be so hard working in service. The hours, the difficult customers. Don't you find it exhausting being on your feet all day?" The tone suggested pity, positioning Diane as an object of charity rather than an equal. "Every job has challenges. I find purpose in serving others well. There's dignity in any honest work, though I notice people often forget that when they're snapping fingers at servers or treating them as invisible." Her words landed with precision. Several people at the table shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own behavior in her description. As courses progressed, each more elaborate than the last, conversation continued around Diane more than with her. The table discussed vacation homes in the Hamptons, upcoming charity events, whose children were attending which Ivy League schools. The women compared recent purchases, handbags that cost thousands, jewelry from exclusive designers, spa treatments at exclusive retreats. Through it all, Diane maintained her composure. She didn't try to contribute to conversations about experiences that she hadn't had. She didn't pretend to be something she wasn't. She simply existed in that space with quiet dignity, allowing their discomfort to be their problem, not hers. But then, Patricia made a critical error of judgment. Turning to Diane with mock sympathy, she said loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "You know, dear, there's no shame in your situation. Everyone has to start somewhere. Have you considered going back to school? I'm sure Marcus could provide references for scholarships for disadvantaged individuals." The condescension was breathtaking. The implication that Diane was disadvantaged, needed saving, required education to be worthy, all delivered with a smile that pretended to be kind. This was the moment everyone at the table would remember. Diane set down her fork with deliberate care, met Patricia's eyes directly, and in a voice that carried calm authority said something that would change the trajectory of the entire evening. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not disadvantaged. I'm a working class, which is different. I have dignity, purpose, and a daughter I'm raising with values that seem increasingly rare in rooms like this, like treating people with respect regardless of their profession or bank account." The gauntlet had been thrown.
After dinner, the gala's main event began, a charity auction raising funds for youth education initiatives in underserved communities. A charismatic auctioneer took the stage, presenting items donated by the wealthy attendees, vacation packages, artwork, exclusive experiences. The bidding was aggressive, competitive, with people raising paddles to show off their wealth as much as to support the cause. Diane watched the performance with growing understanding. This wasn't really about charity. It was about status display, about who could afford to bid higher, about purchasing the social capital that came with visible generosity. The actual cause, children's education, seemed almost secondary to the spectacle. A particularly coveted item came up for bid. A week at a private villa in Tuscany, donated by the Rothschild family. Patricia preened as the auctioneer praised the donation. Bidding started at $10,000 and quickly escalated. $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a vacation rental that would otherwise sit empty. Marcus bid $60,000 and won. As applause rippled through the room, Patricia leaned toward Diane with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Generous, isn't he? Though I suppose when you have that much money, $60,000 is nothing. Not that you would understand that feeling. Diane simply smiled, saying nothing, though her mind was working.
She'd been watching this display of wealth all evening, and something had been crystallizing in her thoughts. Something about these people, their values, and what they considered worthy of attention. Then the auctioneer announced a special item. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have something unique tonight. A mystery donation has been added to our auction, an experience described only as a lesson in perspective. The winning bidder will receive an experience that will challenge their assumptions. Starting bid, $500. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus glanced at Diane, equally puzzled. The mystery nature of the item made people hesitant. The bidding stalled at $2,000, pathetically low compared to previous items. Then, Diane did something that shocked everyone in attendance. She raised her paddle. $3,000, she said clearly. Every head turned. Whispers exploded across the ballroom. The waitress was bidding? With what money? Was this a joke? Patricia looked scandalized. "Dear, are you sure you—" $5,000, she said, her voice stronger now. The auctioneer, surprised but professional, called out, $5,000 to the lady in blue. Any other bidders? Marcus leaned toward her, concerned. "Diane, you don't have to." "I know exactly what I'm doing," she whispered back. When no other bids came, the combination of the mysterious item and the scandal of the waitress bidding had paralyzed the room. The auctioneer declared, "Sold for $5,000. Applause was sparse and confused. As Diane stood to approach the stage to finalize her bid, Patricia's voice carried across the table, intentionally loud. "This is absurd. She's using Marcus's money. This is humiliating for everyone involved." But Diane continued walking. At the payment table, she pulled out a check, her own check from her own account, made out for exactly $5,000. The same amount Marcus had paid her to attend this gala. She had known, since accepting Marcus's invitation, exactly what she would do with that money. The auction coordinator accepted her payment with visible surprise, then handed her an envelope containing the mystery experience details. Diane opened it, read the contents, and smiled. A genuine smile that held both irony and satisfaction. She returned to the table as the auction continued with other items. Patricia couldn't contain herself. "Well, what did you buy?" Diane looked around the table at these people who had spent the evening judging her, dismissing her, treating her as a curiosity or scandal. Then she read from the card in her hand. A lesson in perspective. The winning bidder has donated $5,000 directly to the Youth Education Initiative, funding 1 full year of after-school programming for 20 underprivileged children. The lesson? That giving without expecting recognition or status in return is the truest form of charity. The table fell silent. The irony was devastating. While they had spent tens of thousands of dollars for vacations and status symbols, the waitress had given her entire evening's payment to actually help the children this gala supposedly supported.
Word of Diane's auction win spread through the ballroom like wildfire, transforming the atmosphere completely. The mystery donation that everyone had dismissed suddenly became the most talked about moment of the evening. People began to understand what had actually happened. While they had been spending tens of thousands on luxury experiences and status symbols, the waitress they'd been dismissing all night had given away $5,000, money she actually needed, to directly support the gala's supposed purpose. The gala's coordinator, a woman named Helen Bradshaw who genuinely cared about the youth education cause, approached the microphone during a break between auction items. Her expression was serious, moved. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to share something important. We've had many generous donations tonight, and we're grateful for each contribution, but I want to draw your attention to what just happened." She paused, letting the room settle into attentive silence.
A guest tonight donated $5,000, not for a vacation package, not for a status experience, but directly to the programs we're here to support. What makes this donation particularly meaningful is who made it and what it represents. Helen gestured toward Diane's table. Diane Morrison is a working single mother who serves others for a living. The money she donated tonight represents significant sacrifice for her, money that could have gone toward countless personal needs. She didn't give because it was easy or because it would earn her social recognition. She gave because she understands intimately what these children face, and she chose to help them directly. The room remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. It was no longer dismissive or judgmental. It was contemplative, perhaps even ashamed. This donation, Helen continued, represents a greater percentage of her resources than perhaps any other contribution tonight. It embodies the true spirit of what charity should be, giving not from abundance for recognition, but from genuine care for others, even at personal cost. Diane Morrison has reminded us what tonight is actually supposed to be about. Helen began to applaud. It started slowly, just her hands clapping. Then the auctioneer joined, then someone from a back table, then more people. The applause grew, spreading through the ballroom like a wave. People stood, first one person, then 5, then entire tables. Within moments, the Metropolitan Charity Gala attendees, the wealthiest people in the city, were giving Diane Morrison a standing ovation. Patricia Rothschild remained seated initially, her face frozen in an expression somewhere between shock and humiliation. Her husband Robert, reading the room's direction, stood and pulled her up with him. She complied, clapping mechanically, her earlier condescension nowhere to be seen. Diane stood, not with pride or smugness, but with quiet dignity. Tears glistened in her eyes, not from triumph, but from the emotional weight of the evening, the validation of her worth, the recognition that her values had resonated. Marcus stood beside her, his own applause genuine and heartfelt. He leaned toward her and whispered, "You've just taught an entire room of wealthy people what real wealth actually looks like." As the ovation continued, something shifted in the room's energy. The Rothschild sisters approached Diane's table, their earlier superiority replaced with something resembling respect. That was really something," Stephanie said, struggling to find words adequate to the moment. "You've made us all think tonight." Other guests came by to introduce themselves properly, no longer treating Diane as a curiosity, but as someone worthy of genuine attention. Some apologized indirectly for their earlier coldness. Others simply expressed respect for her choice. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from an unexpected source. The young black server who had caught Diane's eye earlier approached during a quiet moment, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing up, for staying, for not letting them make you small. You reminded me that I belong anywhere I choose to be." Diane hugged her tightly. "You always belonged, sweetheart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the gala concluded and guests began to depart, Diane realized that what had begun as a potentially humiliating evening had become something else entirely. A lesson delivered not through words, but through actions, showing everyone present that true class has nothing to do with wealth, status, or social connections. It's about character, values, and the courage to act on principles even when it costs you something.
By Sunday morning, Diane Morrison's name was trending on social media. Someone at the gala had posted about what happened, and the story had gone viral, not as scandal, but as inspiration. News outlets picked up the story. Waitress outshines wealthy elite at charity gala. The $5,000 lesson in true generosity. Working mother shows billionaires what charity really means. Diane woke to her phone buzzing constantly with notifications, messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, friend requests from strangers, and interview requests from media outlets. Her daughter Jasmine sat on the couch scrolling through social media, her eyes wide. "Mom, you're everywhere. People are calling you a hero." Jasmine showed her mother a particularly viral tweet with over 200,000 likes. While rich people bid $50K for Tuscany vacations, this working single mom donated her entire evening's pay to actually help kids. That's real wealth. That's real class. Hashtag Diane Morrison, true charity. But not all the attention was positive. Some critics accused her of grandstanding, suggested Marcus had put her up to it, or claimed she was trying to make wealthy people look bad. Conservative commentators framed it as class warfare. One particularly harsh columnist wrote, "Morrison's donation, while well-intentioned, was a performative gesture designed to shame successful people." Diane read some of the criticism and shook her head. They still don't understand. It wasn't about shaming anyone. It was about remembering what we were supposedly there for, helping children. Marcus called that afternoon. "How are you handling all this attention?" "Honestly, it's overwhelming. I just did what felt right. I didn't expect it to become a national conversation," Diane admitted. "That's because you're genuine. In a world of performance and pretense, authenticity stands out. I should warn you, though, there's more coming. Several major news outlets want interviews. The gala organizers want to honor you at next year's event." And he paused. "The Youth Education Initiative has seen a massive surge in donations since the story broke. Your $5,000 has inspired over $2 million in new contributions." Diane felt tears well up. $2 million for the programs. That was what mattered. Not the attention, not the praise, but the actual impact on children's lives. However, not everyone was celebrating. Patricia Rothschild published an op-ed in a society magazine defending herself and other gala attendees. While Miss Morrison's donation was admirable, it's unfair to diminish the contributions of those who donated vacation packages and experiences. These items raise significant funds through auction bidding. Charity takes many forms and all should be valued. The article was technically correct, but missed the point entirely. It wasn't about the amount of money raised, it was about the spirit of giving, about who was sacrificing versus who was simply displaying wealth. The public response to Patricia's op-ed was harsh, with many calling her defensive and tone-deaf. Meanwhile, practical implications of Diane's newfound recognition were unfolding. Her employer at Les Bernardines called her Monday morning. Diane's heart sank, expecting to be fired for embarrassing wealthy clientele or for the controversy. Instead, the restaurant manager said, "Diane, we've received over 300 reservation requests specifically asking to be served by you. You've become something of a symbol. The owners want to meet with you about a promotion to front-of-house manager with a substantial raise. Your dignity and principles reflect exactly what we want Les Bernardines to represent." Diane was stunned. What she had feared would cost her job had instead transformed her professional prospects. But she remained cautious. "I appreciate this, truly, but I need to think about it. I don't want to be a symbol or a marketing opportunity. I just want to do good work and raise my daughter." "That attitude is exactly why you're valuable," the manager responded. That evening, Diane sat with Jasmine and discussed the changes unfolding. "It's a lot, baby. Part of me wishes I could just go back to before, to being invisible and uncomplicated." Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand. "But Mom, you were never invisible. Not to me, not to the people you serve well, not to Mr. Chen. Other people's failure to see you doesn't mean you weren't there. You just made yourself impossible to ignore, and that's powerful." Diane realized her 15-year-old daughter had just articulated something profound about visibility, worth, and the politics of being seen.
2 weeks after the gala, Diane accepted an invitation to speak on a panel about economic inequality and social mobility at a local university. She was nervous. Public speaking had never been her strength, and she'd be sharing the stage with economists, policy experts, and social activists who had spent careers studying issues she'd simply lived. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and community members. The panel moderator introduced each speaker with their credentials: PhD in economics, director of Social Justice Initiative, author of best-selling books on inequality. Then she came to Diane. And joining us is Diane Morrison, whose recent actions at the Metropolitan Charity Gala sparked a national conversation about class, dignity, and what we value as a society. When it was Diane's turn to speak, She took a breath and spoke from her heart. I don't have fancy degrees or expert credentials. What I have is lived experience. I've worked in service my whole adult life, retail, food service, cleaning, jobs that society sees as temporary, as stepping stones to real careers. But for millions of us, these are our careers. This is our life's work. And there's dignity in it, even when others refuse to see it. She continued, at that gala, I wasn't trying to shame wealthy people. I was trying to remind everyone in that room, myself included, what we were supposedly there for. It's easy to perform charity when it costs you nothing real, when it actually elevates your status. It's harder to give in ways that genuinely sacrifice, that expect no return beyond helping others. A student raised her hand. Miss Morrison, some critics say you were grandstanding, that your donation was performative. How do you respond? Diane considered the question carefully. Every public act of charity can be called performative. The difference is in the intent and the cost. I didn't publicize my donation. It became public because others noticed. And as for the cost, that $5,000 represented real sacrifice for me and my family. I'm not saying that makes me better than anyone. I'm saying that true generosity considers both the amount and the sacrifice. Another question came, do you think wealthy people can ever truly understand the experiences of working-class people? Understanding doesn't require identical experience. It requires genuine curiosity, humility, and willingness to listen. Marcus Chen comes from wealth now, but he treats service workers with dignity because he remembers where he came from, and he's chosen not to let success make him dismissive of others. The problem isn't wealth itself, it's when wealth creates such distance that you forget the humanity of people who serve you. After the panel, several students approached Diane. A young woman, first-generation college student working 2 jobs, thanked her with tears in her eyes. My professors know I waitress, but they treat it like something embarrassing I need to escape from. You reminded me there's honor in my work. But not everyone was supportive. As Diane left the auditorium, she encountered a well-dressed older man who'd been in the audience. Miss Morrison, your message is dangerous. You're teaching young people to be content with service jobs instead of striving for more. That's not empowerment, it's limiting. Diane stopped, looked at him directly. I'm not teaching contentment with inequality. I'm teaching that your job doesn't determine your human worth. There's a difference. We should fight for better wages, benefits, and working conditions for service workers. But while we're fighting for that, we shouldn't internalize the message that serving others makes us less valuable as humans. Both things can be true. Work deserves fair compensation, and workers deserve dignity regardless of their profession. The man frowned, clearly not convinced, and walked away. Diane watched him go, thinking about how deeply our society's class prejudices run, how threatening it is to some people when those deemed lower demand to be seen as equals. Marcus, who had attended the panel, walked with Diane to her car. You did well in there. You spoke truth to power. I spoke truth to a university auditorium. Power mostly wasn't listening. Some of them were, and sometimes that's enough to start change. Seeds planted today might bloom years from now in ways we can't predict.
6 months after the gala, the full impact of that one evening continued to unfold in ways Diane never anticipated. The Youth Education Initiative reported that donations had sustained at elevated levels, funding expansion of their programs into 3 additional communities. Children who would have had no after-school support now had mentoring, tutoring, and enrichment opportunities. Lives were being changed by the cascade effect of one woman's principled action. But perhaps more significantly, conversations about service work, dignity, and class were happening in spaces they'd never penetrated before. Several high-end restaurants implemented new policies about how staff should be treated by customers,
with some establishments ejecting patrons who were rude to servers. It became socially unacceptable in certain circles to dismiss or condescend to service workers. Not universally, but enough to notice. Diane accepted the promotion at Le Bernardin, but negotiated something unusual. She would split her time between management duties and still serving tables 1 day per week. "I don't want to lose touch with the work," she explained to her employers. "Management should always remember what it's like on the floor." Her daughter Jasmine thrived with the increased financial stability. The dental work was completed, the car was reliable, and stress about basic survival had eased. Not disappeared, but eased. More importantly, Jasmine had witnessed her mother stand with dignity in spaces designed to diminish her, and that lesson would shape how she moved through her own life. Marcus and Diane developed a genuine friendship, meeting monthly for coffee at a modest cafe, neither for publicity nor performance, but because they discovered they enjoyed each other's company. Marcus found Diane's perspective grounding, a reminder of what mattered beyond business success. Diane appreciated Marcus's willingness to use his resources and platform to amplify causes that mattered. Together, they created a scholarship program specifically for children of service workers, waitstaff, janitors, retail workers, home health aides, professions that society undervalued. The Morrison-Chen Scholarship didn't just provide tuition money. It affirmed that these children and their families had worth and potential deserving of investment. The Metropolitan Charity Gala invited Diane to be a guest of honor at the following year's event. She declined. "That evening wasn't about me being honored. It was about remembering what charity is supposed to mean. If you want to honor that lesson, invest in making your gala genuinely about the cause rather than social performance." Her words were published in society pages and sparked debate. Some called her ungracious, others praised her consistency. Diane didn't engage with either response. She'd said what needed saying and moved on. Patricia Rothschild, surprisingly, reached out privately to Diane 8 months after the gala. They met for coffee, an awkward encounter neither woman particularly wanted, but both felt necessary. Patricia didn't apologize directly, but she did acknowledge, "You made me uncomfortable that night, and I've spent months understanding why. It wasn't because you did anything wrong. It was because you exposed how performative my charity had become, how disconnected from actual purpose." It wasn't a full reckoning, but it was honest. Diane appreciated that more than an empty apology would have meant. Years later, when journalists did retrospective pieces on the Gala incident, they often framed it as a David versus Goliath story, a triumph of the underdog. But Diane always corrected that narrative when given the opportunity. It wasn't David and Goliath. It wasn't me versus them. It was a reminder that we all share humanity, that worth isn't determined by wealth or status, and that our actions reveal our values more clearly than our words ever can. The real legacy wasn't the viral moment or the temporary fame. It was quieter, more personal. It was in the service workers who held their heads higher, who refused to internalize society's dismissiveness. It was in the young people who learned that dignity is inherent, not earned through status. It was in the incremental but real shift in how some people thought about class, service, and human worth. And it was in Diane's own life, in her daughter's confidence, in her financial stability, and in her knowledge that she had stood in a space designed to diminish her and had not only survived, but transformed it, not through performance or pretense, but by being exactly who she was, with unwavering dignity.